Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, I want to talk about some news and some notes on the Toronto Maple Leafs heading into this year's trade deadline. Leading into this year's trade deadline, it seems like there's been a lot of rumors surrounding the Toronto Maple Leafs and connecting them to left-handed shooting defensemen. And by giving their roster a quick glance, you'd think that they'd be interested in more guys that shot right-handed. But this Sheldon Keefe quote on Ilya Lyubushkin from March the 6th, part of what we talked about today is that he is feeling better around here in terms of knowing what we expect and what we are looking from him. Wants to make sure Ilya is comfortable before giving him more minutes against tougher matchups. Morgan Rielly and Ilya Lyubushkin have been playing some significant minutes together over the last couple of games, and the numbers are quite encouraging, especially against the Carolina Hurricanes last night, where they controlled a vast majority of the expected goals. They lose the shot attempt share, but post-game, Sheldon Keefe had some quotes where he sort of hinted that that was by design, that he wanted his team to stay patient and wait out the Carolina defense and not give up too much defensively themselves and strike back when they felt that they had some good opportunities. And you know what? That's 2 games in a row against the Hurricanes. I know that they got killed in the first game way back in October against them, but that's 2 games in a row where they get heavily outshot, but the scoring opportunities are relatively even and the Maple Leafs come out on top. So whatever Sheldon Keefe is doing, whatever game plan he's drawn up, it seems to be working against the Hurricanes. And if Morgan Rielly and Ilya Lyubushkin are able to continue playing well together, then that frees up TJ Brodie to be a problem solver elsewhere in your lineup. And because he's a left-handed shooting defenseman who can play both the left and the right side, that opens up a lot more options for the Maple Leafs to explore at this year's trade deadline. I also want to take a minute to show some love for Timothy Lilligren here. Playing with Morgan Rielly over the last little while, the underlying numbers are very impressive, especially the offensive output that those two were able to achieve. I mean, the defensive numbers, the discrepancy between the actual goals against per 60 and the expected goals against per 60 could be because neither of those guys are necessarily known for their play in front of their own net. But at the same time, I don't really know how to evaluate players the last little while, especially defensively on the Maple Leafs, because the goaltending was equally as bad as their defense, if not worse. He's 57 games into his NHL career. He's going to make some mistakes. He's going to take some bad penalties. Maybe that's something that they revisit. Maybe it's something for next season, but those numbers are very encouraging. Yesterday on the Fan 590, Frank Saravalli said that Mark Giordano's top interest and priority is to play in Toronto. Whether that happens at this year's trade deadline or next year via free agency is something that we're going to have to wait and find out. I think an underrated element to possibly acquiring Mark Giordano is that usually you worry about, chemistry and how guys will gel coming into your team come the trade deadline. But with Mark Giordano and TJ Brodie, they literally have thousands of minutes of experience already playing together, including the season that Mark Giordano won the Norris Trophy in 2018-2019. Remember, the narrative coming out when TJ Brodie first signed in Toronto was whether or not he'd be able to be effective away from Mark Giordano, and the answer to that question is yes, he can be, and the two of them can be awesome together. But Chris Johnston on Insider Trading saying here that Giordano is among the Leafs targets, and Dubas and Francis have a Sault Ste. Marie connection that they go way back on, but they can't come together on a trade. Seattle wants a first rounder for Giordano, but Dubas has told teams that he will not move a first rounder for a rental, and that includes some top prospects as well. This tweet here from Darren Dreger, the Seattle Kraken also impressed by the return for Ben Chiarot. There's been significant interest in veteran defenseman Mark Giordano, so the Chiarot move could fuel the market. And that, of course, was a 2023 first-round pick, a fourth-round pick, and a prospect that was drafted in the 3rd round just a couple of seasons ago. Way to go, Florida, absolutely blowing the precedents that was set in that Ducks-Avalanche trade where it was only a second and a decent prospect for Josh Manson. Which, by the way, if you're yelling at Kyle Dubas for not pulling the trigger on a deal for Josh Manson, it just sounds like he didn't want to come here. Another little note that we can throw in here before we actually look at some numbers for Giordano on the year and whether or not this is a good idea is that he does currently have a modified no-trade clause where he lists 19 teams that he can be traded to. Ron Francis obviously has an obligation to get as much as he possibly can in a deal for Mark Giordano, but if his heart is really set on playing in Toronto, he's the captain of that team, a veteran player, and a good one at that. Just work out a fair deal here. I think because you want to do right by him, that there's a compromise between a first and a second. Maybe it's a second and Travis Dermott, or a second and a lesser prospect. He's playing top 4 minutes this year for the Seattle Kraken in producing very good defensive results, even at his age. And he's just 1 year removed from putting up these type of numbers with the Calgary Flames, playing at a top pairing role for them. Yeah, Mark Giordano can still do it. If you're looking at his micro stats from this season, this is a guy who still defends his blue line quite well and can still move the puck out of his own zone. And the Maple Leafs obviously had some problems giving up too many opportunities off the rush this year. Mark Giordano is a guy who could help them. You have to also remember that Giordano's step back offensively may be age-related, but also the Seattle Kraken aren't a very good offensive team either. But they are a decent defensive one, and he plays a lot of minutes there. If you're looking at his numbers with and without his Seattle teammates this year, all of them are better defensively with him, and most are worse off defensively without him. And there isn't particularly a player that he's relying upon to produce good results this season. They're overall just a better team with Mark Giordano on the ice, both offensively and defensively as well. And I love that there's absolutely just nothing going on in front of their net or in that low slot area. Even their penalty kill is way better with him compared to without him. And out of Seattle defenders, he spends the 4th highest percentage of his ice time playing up against the other team's best players, and the overall numbers aren't necessarily the greatest in terms of the shot attempt share and the dangerous Fenwick 4, which measures the quality of unblocked shot attempts, but both metrics relative to his teammates, Mark Giordano is producing good results playing up against the other team's best players in more of a defensive role for the Kraken. If the only reason why you don't want Mark Giordano is because he's 38 years old, you're wrong. Dude's a legit top 4 defenseman. He's from Toronto, he wants to play here, and maybe he takes a Jason Spezza type contract next year and sticks around. The $6.75 million cap hit may be a bit of a challenge. The Kraken would have to retain 50%, but if you include a roster player like Travis Dermott in the deal, you make some other roster moves, maybe internally, you could make the money work. And if a guy like Jake Muzzin stays on LTIR for the remainder of the regular season, then the cap space becomes less of a concern. Whether or not he comes back or stays on it is kind of yet to be seen. We'll get a better idea after the trade deadline. No matter what they say, they're not going to show their hand. There were a couple of days last week where he was skating really hard, and then the latest news on it is that they were going to dial that back and just let him chill for a bit. The latest news on Hampus Lindholm is that contract extensions have completely stalled and that the Ducks are now preparing to trade him. But after they traded Josh Manson for a second and a decent prospect, they want a first, a third, and a top prospect for Hampus Lindholm. The Florida Panthers really screwed it up, man. Because of where the Ducks are in the standings, and the fact that contract extensions have completely stalled out on him, I don't think that the current GM there can take the risk in keeping him. They're a smaller market team that relies on the playoff revenue, and if they're not going to get that, they can't just let him walk in free agency for absolutely nothing. Some things that we will get to in a minute here, including Matthew Knies and Travis Dermott likely being given a fresh start, but there are obviously other teams in the hunt for a guy like Hampus Lindholm, but they more than likely wait for the price to drop. This sounds like a 2 p.m., 2:30 move where, the GM doesn't really have very many options. I'm not going to go as in-depth on Hampus Lindholm as I did with Mark Giordano, just because the asking price is a lot, and the Maple Leafs have already stated that they do not want to give up their first-round pick or top prospects, but if you want to know more about him, I did an entire video a couple of days ago that I will leave linked above the screen and at the end of this one. There's a lot of really good stuff in 32 Thoughts this week, so I'll leave it linked in the video description if anyone wants to check it out, but point 6 is where I want to pivot to next. Toronto is also looking at fourth line changes. They were committed to getting Simmons to 1,000 games, and then Elliott talks about being a fan of Jason Spezza, and I mean, aren't we all? But then he notes that they've also talked to Vancouver about Tyler Mott, as per Irfan Gaffar, but Tampa Bay's also been in on Tyler Mott as well, and maybe we can look at his numbers in a second here, but prospects Nick Abruzzese and Matthew Knies are also possibilities after their NCAA seasons are over. Wayne Simmons has been a healthy scratch the last couple of games, and the way that Elliott worded that in 32 Thoughts is he's almost implying that the Leafs got him to 1,000 games, and now he's going to take a bit of a back seat. The numbers against the Dallas Stars for that fourth line with Clifford, Spezza, and Kasha weren't necessarily the greatest, but I liked Kyle Clifford's game. And the same against the Carolina Hurricanes. I liked his play, and that fourth line was fairly effective with Nick Roberts in there instead of Anze Kasha. Tyler Mott is 27 years old. He's going to be a UFA at the end of the season. He makes $1.225 million against the salary cap, 5'10", 192 pounds, but he definitely does throw his weight around out there. He's playing a decent amount of minutes for the Vancouver Canucks this year in a large defensive role and producing good numbers. This is a guy who I would really be interested in for that fourth line if the Maple Leafs are looking for that type of upgrade. If we're looking at his Vancouver teammates with and without him, you got to remember that he plays a large defensive role for the Vancouver Canucks. Guys are worse off defensively without him, and he's not really relying on anyone particularly to produce those good results. Another guy that, when you look at the micro stats, does a very good job at defending his own team's blue line, which again is something that the Maple Leafs have been looking to address this year with all the opportunities that they've been giving up off the rush. And if you're looking for some home-style, wholesome stats here, he's second on the Vancouver Canucks in hits per 60. Also leads them in blocked shots per 60. The NHL website takes forever. Yeah, leads them in blocks per 60. And in terms of takeaways per 60, he's second on their team as well. He's a good player. The decision to trade for a guy like Tyler Mott or sign Matthew Knies to an entry-level deal and burn a year off of it is a balancing act. It depends on what the cost is to acquire a guy like Tyler Mott. If it's way too expensive, you might be better off giving a guy who's just 19 but having a hell of a season and opportunity. 6'3", over 200 pounds. He's an absolute heat-seeking missile out there with a knack for just going after the puck, going into the corners. Got an underrated shot, and he's not very slow either. He's having a hell of a season this year, like we already said. He played for Team USA at the Olympics. His first season in the NCAA, I believe he's up for a couple of awards, like a first or second team All-Star sort of bid. This guy was just drafted last July. With Nick Abruzzese, he's a smaller player, 5'10" and 161 pounds, but he's a bit older and has played more games at the college level. He also played for Team USA at the Olympics this season, and he's been a top prospect in college hockey for the last number of years. Because Abruzzese is 22 years old, he would only be allowed to sign a 2-year entry-level deal, and if they gave it to him now and burned a year of it, it'd essentially be a 1-year contract. Something else to keep note of is that the Maple Leafs are currently at 47 out of 50 professional contracts here, and even if they move out a guy like Dermott, that's 46 out of 50. If you're talking about signing Nick Abruzzese, Matthew Knies, and acquiring another defenseman, they're going to be really close to that 50 contract limit, and you may not be able to sign them both. Or you can, I don't know, it depends on what their plans are and how the trades end up shaking down, and if the Maple Leafs want to be active in signing any other college free agents. If you had to ask Elliot Friedman, I think that he thinks that we'll see Matthew Knies in a Maple Leafs uniform next month. But I think that's about gonna do it for this video. I don't want to make the video too long, but I also don't want to leave stuff out as well. I mean, there were some rumors saying that the Maple Leafs could be in on Connor Garland, but I don't know, that would involve trading first-round picks and top prospects, and the Vancouver Canucks really like Timothy Lilligren. Connor Garland is a guy who I really like, but I don't know. Can't talk about everything in one video. So I'm going to get this up before it's completely outdated and ruined anyway, but make sure to like the video if you did like it and subscribe for more, because more is always on the way. And guys, I'll talk to you again in the next one.